Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Sponsored by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Today's special guest is experienced field archaeologist Dr. David E. Graves. Now let's explore the field of archaeology in today's episode.
Well, good morning to everybody. This is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. My name is Dr. George Sparks. Today, my co-host is Dr. David Graves. The topic today, did a gospel, or was a gospel, actually discovered in an ancient mummy mask? We're going to take a look at that possibility today. Dr. Graves did his research, and my history as a curator, for the general population, as yourself, maybe you don't understand or know exactly what exactly is the mummy mask, and how in the world would a fragment, a piece of parchment maybe, be taken from a mummy mask and be relevant or part of one of the early gospels. So that's what we're going to discuss today. Dr. Graves, do you have some pictures for us of early ancient mummy masks?
Yes, I do. I'll share that with everyone, give everybody an idea what we're talking about here. And I guess the best place to start is with what is a mummy mask? Oh, right. A mummy there with one of the mummy masks. So did a mummy mask reveal the Gospel of Mark? Technically is what we're talking about. Unwrapping the truth. And here is a sarcophagus with the mummy mask. A few of you that viewed our last podcast might have seen this one that George had in his studio there. We showed it and talked about the sarcophagus, this wooden sarcophagus from Egypt. But today we're going to just talk about the mask. Now here's a few of the different masks that are made from, it's called cartonnage. It's like paper mache. So they take strips of linen, papyrus, they mix it together with a special substance like a glue, and they make these masks, and then they paint them up nice and pretty. And so here's a number of them from different periods to give you an idea of the colors, the different shapes, and they would put these on the mummy after they've died. Sometimes they would paint them to make them look like they're the deceased, and sometimes they would just paint them up pretty. Here's some close-ups. This is the 1st century AD. They were primarily used from the New Kingdom through to the Ptolemaic period, with some continuation into the early Roman period. But they peter off then, and then they turn into a different style of mask. I'll show you here in a few minutes. So here's the Middle Kingdom one. This is from the Met Museum. This is a male. You can see the goatee that he's wearing there. And this is sort of like a chest plate that they would put over top, and you see the 2 holes there. This is where they would tie it to the mummy, to the body itself, keep it from coming off. And sometimes they put some glitter on them, or they paint them up with bright colors. This is the New Kingdom period as well.
Beautiful.
This is a museum in Brussels. Yes, nice. All the traditional Egyptian colors of the lapis lazuli, which is the blue, and then you have the carnelian red, and then you have some of the yellow down here, all earth tones. Here's another one from the New Kingdom from the Met Museum. This one here has a lot of carnelian, more of the red. Another one with some of the red from the Met.
Look how dark their skin is. That's nice. Just beautiful. Just beautiful.
Yep. So this person here probably was Nubian.
Yeah, exactly.
From Egypt. New Kingdom period. This is a wooden one. They would sometimes paint them as well. So you find them going from, cartonnage to wood. Common for non-royals would be the wooden ones. And here's another one. The 3rd intermediate period, 1070 to 664 BC. A friend of mine, Terry Barnwell, has sold this one to a museum down in the States, University of Tennessee, Knoxville. It's on display there. This one's pretty rough shape, but again, gives you an idea. This is a late period. It is cartonnage, which is the paper mache.
Exactly.
Not as vibrant colors, but different styles of the face, different symbolic motifs that would paint on them, and the Ptolemaic period, 332 to 30 BC. This has a lot of the nice dark blue and the red and the gold. They like to use the gold. And this one actually blends the Egyptian and Hellenistic styles with realistic Greco-Roman influence in the later period with these vibrant colors and detailed paintings. And this was the peak of the use of the cartonnage mask, was in the Ptolemaic period.
And that would be your Hellenistic period as well. It's within there.
Hellenistic, that's right, yeah. This is from Manchester Museum, another pretty one.
Yeah, they are.
There's another one. Again, the blend between the Egyptian style and the Hellenistic style during this later period that combines the influence of the Greco-Roman and the Egyptian. And then we come into the Roman period. Now, this is the more traditional, they're known as the Fayum portrait mask because they were discovered in a place in Egypt called Fayum. And these are wooden panels, and they showed more of a lifelike style until they were Christianized, reduced their use. But from 30 BC to about 100 AD, by the Roman period, the cartonnage mask declined as these wooden Fayum portraits. Panels became more common, although there are some cartonnage still found during that time period. They weren't as common as papyrus-based ones. Now that's going to become important when we get talk about some of the stuff about finding papyrus writings in these masks a little later. So keep that in mind, that there still is a few of these cartonnage masks kicking around in the Roman period. There's one of the Fayum masks. Now these ones, this one's from Wikipedia Commons, but I've got a few that I took actually in Russia. There's another one, Fayum mask.
And these are the wood.
These are the wood panels, yeah. So they would do a portrait of the individual who died, more lifelike on the coffin lid.
Mm-hmm.
Here is one from the Pushkin Museum that I took, just unbelievably lifelike. What I liked about them is it gives us a chance to go back in time. So this is what somebody looked like at 100 AD.
Right. I like how he has my hairstyle too. That's cool.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, combed it out nice, and he's got my beard.
You know, we're good looking guys.
Here's another one. Again, they like their beards. So we get to see what an Egyptian in the Roman period looked like, how they dressed, how they looked. And you notice he's wearing a leaf crown. In Greek, it's Stephanos crown. Here's another individual, again from the Pushkin Museum. But it's like you're looking at a photograph. I really was fascinated by these all around 100 AD from the area of Fayum. And this is the sarcophagus that you had there in the office with the collar. And
it's still here.
Perhaps we'll stop at that point. There's the wishak. This is the broad collar.
That's a piece of cartonnage there too.
Yeah, a close-up of it. Look out some of the fuzziness. Just beautiful colors of the Ptolemaic period. There's a close-up of the lid.
Yeah. You know, it's early in the morning here in New Mexico. And hey, this is what you were talking about right here, this piece of cartonnage. Let's see if I got it. There it is right there. And see, your picture is better. I'll try to do the glare. It's very thin.
Yes.
You can see it's papyrus, and they paint on papyrus.
Yeah, or paper in our.
Or paper, yeah. So
we would call it paper, but it gives you everyone a good idea of the proportions and size when you hold it like
thin. That. Yeah, it's very, very thin. So today's introduction was a fragment of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, discovered in a first century mummy mask. And David was so gracious to show us a selection of different mummy masks. So there are different qualities and different techniques, but basically when we get down to it, the more common people that were, not wealthy, we could describe the mummy mask as basically paper mache. That's the best way to describe it.
So in 2014, there was the claim that a fragment of the Gospel of Mark was discovered while they were doing some deconstruction of one of these masks. And they claimed that they had, in the process of unwrapping it, found a piece of papyrus with writing on it, and they were able to read it and identify that it was the Gospel of Mark. So in 2014, Dr. Craig Evans, who was actually a friend of mine, and I know him. We've been out to lunch together, and he used to teach up here in Canada. And so years ago, he told us out to lunch one day that he had this incredible discovery that he was going to be announcing sometime soon, and he couldn't say what it was, or he'd have to kill us. So but we knew something was about to come. So then, in about a few months later, he came out with his claim that they had discovered the Gospel of Mark, which one of the earliest datings of papyrus of the Gospels that had ever been discovered. And so Craig had made this claim. Now, he's a well-known New Testament scholar, one of the experts on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so everybody believed him. He's written some 70 books and 600 articles to his name, and so he's a prolific biblical scholar. So we had no reason to doubt him. So he's a noted individual, but this turned out to be extremely controversial, and Evan claimed that a team he was part of had uncovered a fragment of the Gospel of Mark dating to before 90 AD, hidden inside a mummy mask. They dubbed it the FCM, first century mask, or the first century mark, the FCM. So if it was true, that would make it the earliest known New Testament fragment. So if this claim that he made is true, it would make it the oldest known New Testament fragment ever discovered. So that's a pretty big deal if it was true. For example, the Life Science article featuring Craig Evans claimed that the CFM came from a mummy mask, but Scott Carroll, who seems to know more about the FCM and contracting papyri from mummy masks than anybody else who had spoken publicly, said that he saw no evidence that it came from a mummy mask. So I'll leave it there. That's kind of the introduction of what we're talking about, where the controversy arises, and how we're coming to talk about the Gospel of Mark, papyrus, and mummy masks today. We'll talk more about technical parts of this and the controversy here in a moment. So, George, if you wanted to pick up and.
Oh, yes. Okay. So that fills us in on exactly how it was announced.
Right.
And at least one of the scholars that was
Involved with it.
involved. Thanks, sir.
Yeah. The big question, of course, now is it true? Did it come from a mummy mask? And does it date to the first century? So those are kind of the questions that everybody was wondering. We've got a few answers to that, but you can continue.
Okay, so actually when this first started was around, I think, 2012.
Yeah.
And then around 2015, they were still waiting for evidence of it being announced, or some kind of a publication, or going to peer review.
Yes, they wanted to see some photographs of it and pictures, but.
So there's a lot of hesitation about this fragment of the Gospel of Mark, and that it came initially from a mummy mask. So what set scholars off, especially those that would be involved with antiquities, is that, are you destroying mummy masks to find ancient literature, whether it be Homer, or whether it be just ancient documents, like you might think of a newspaper and the paper mache being used, and say, well, if we tore apart something that was old, would it give us evidence of what was going on in the 1850s, or during, let's say, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War? Kind of like that frame of mind, except in a mummy mask it's another concern, because we're looking at a mummy mask that's 2,000 years old. So as a curator, I told you I might go off on a tangent. As a curator, I'm looking at what could be the repercussions of this, and what would be going through my mind before this would go into some kind of a tangent. Of course, the intro would be, was the Gospel Mark discovered in a first century mummy mask? Since you showed us what mummy masks look like and how there's different styles, and depending on a person's wealth, the quality of the mummy mask.
People need to realize is that everybody that died, of course, had these, and some of them were not as fancy, nor were they as elaborate as the ones that I showed. And so there are a dime a dozen. There's lots of them around. The argument was, well, these things are not that valuable, not that important as a mummy mask. They're more important as perhaps giving us some hints of some lost literature. So that was their argument.
That was their argument, right? But when we look at I'm not a scholar in New Testament literature, but it's common knowledge that the Gospel of Mark would be the earliest of the Gospels, according to many scholars.
Right.
And possibly, once again, it's the first, you could say the first recording, first written Gospel, some scholars suggest, would be around 60 of the Common Era. Maybe. I'll say maybe. All right. That means if I'm going to take, and first of all, it's not going to be a printing press. It's not, like I said, newspaper. That's the wrong idea. This is going to be written literature. That means you're going to have a scribe, and you got the original, and now there's going to be copies, and this is going to be expensive. So you could say in the early church, for those to have a copy of Mark written would be extremely rare, extremely expensive. Would it be in the first century? Now think about this. In the first century, would a Gospel of Mark be torn apart to make a mummy mask in the first century? I'm looking at as a curator, knowing what it takes, that it's not going to be a print, it's going to be handwritten. I don't want to keep on saying that, but that's something to have in mind. Because once again, a mummy mask, all right, is going to be made out of papyrus, like we're going to think of cloth, also gypsum, and glue. And of course, on the surface, it's going to be paint.
Right.
So, like you said, today we would call it paper mache. But the question, I'll say one of the first questions is that, okay, you got a handwritten document of the first century, which will be extremely rare because it is handwritten. Not everybody was literate. They could probably talk, Greek. It's going to probably be written in Greek, Gospel of Mark.
Right. Koine Greek.
All right, Koine Greek. So somebody has to actually be literate both to read and write, and it's going to be expensive, and it's probably going to be a copy of a copy of a copy. But the same thing is that it's still going to be very, very rare. And you think it would be a treasure in an early church to have a copy of Mark. It would be extremely valuable. Now, when we look at the first century, okay, they say a first century mummy mask. What part of the first century? The early part of the first century, the middle part of the first century, the latter part of the first century. Well, it has to be the latter part because that's when the Gospel of Mark possibly would have been written, not printed, written. What's the odds of it being in a mummy mask? Now, they said, well, in some of the articles, they talked about carbon-14 dating. You tell me what being carbon-14 dating, is it plus or minus how many years? 100? If I said I did carbon-14 dating and now I got a plus or minus, or at least 40 years or 50 years, that carbon dating is almost worthless. You got a mummy mask, okay, and you can date it probably because of how it's designed from the first century. But then they said, oh, I did carbon dating. Then we go, oh, wow, plus or minus so many years. And we're looking for a gospel that is going to be written, handwritten, somewhere 60 CE or after. I think the earliest fragment, what do they call it? P56, and it's second century. It's just a fragment. It's like the size of a postcard.
Yeah, I've got a photo of that I'll show here.
All right. So this is, as a curator, this is what's going through my mind. You're going to start ripping apart mummy masks, looking for the gospel, a fragment of the Gospel of Mark written in the first century, and you're going to say, oh, we got a first century mummy mask. But what part of the first century? And then we said, oh, we use carbon-14 dating. Big deal. It's going to still have plus or minus so many years. That makes it kind of like, to me, moot. What? Okay. And then you're saying, well, you're taking something that would be so rare and so valuable to the church at that time period. What's the chances of it actually being wrapped up among a mummy mask? To me, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah,
now,
well, the thing that was on everybody's mind is, where is a photograph of this piece of papyrus?
Okay.
Where is the evidence that it was found in a mummy mask? We've just got a world-renowned scholar claiming that it's in a mummy mask.
Right, we've seen that before, though.
And then, of course, his reply at the time was, I had to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, that I couldn't reveal any of the information until it was published. So we waited with bated breath to see when it was going to be published academically, that we'd have this information, rather than just a anonymous claim that anybody could really make. But then we need to probably go a little further in the debate. Did you want to go to the debate video that came out with
No, I'm still on a tyrant here,
Okay.
because I look at, okay, as a curator, this could bring about a tangent of people getting mummy masks looking for a lost gospel. Now, what's going to happen in the antiquity market? They're going to start coming up with masks. Why? Because now there's going to be a value to it. Now we got to find also, next thing we got to do is find some wealthy people that are gullible enough to buy these masks, and it's going to be at an inflated price now.
Right.
Because, so what I'm going to look for, okay, did anybody say, hey, we found the mummy mask that came out and there's no documentation? Do you have a receipt for this mummy mask? To cover your booty? Because what if somebody says, hey, that was looted? Well,
You got a receipt there?
Yeah, these are receipts. That's why I went on a tangent. I got receipts that go back to the 1980s, just in case, something might be questioned. Why? Because my end has to be legit. I did the best I can to make sure that it was not looted. It came from correct sources and documented.
You bought a mummy mask?
Did I buy my? No, this is just receipts, because I'm just talking about receipts. Now
Right.
there's a
If you
mummy
do,
thing behind me.
but you do
But even,
buy antiquities, so you do have legitimate antiquities with receipts, is my point.
absolutely. Not only that, you should have some kind of credentials. Now, this is my old curator card. And so you're going to present some kind of documentation. You're going to have a follow through. Now, you tell me something that if I'm going to rip apart a mummy mask, well, I would do it. You can see right now, I'd go on a tangent. What the heck you doing? You're looking for a piece of gospel in a first century mummy mask. Are you out of your mind? So people are going to say, oh, let's go do it. So let's go find some very wealthy people. I ain't going to mention no names. And the thing is that, okay, so some wealthy people, I'm talking about wealthy billionaires. Millions of dollars is not going to mean nothing to them. So you get some mummy. This is what's going to happen on the market. They're going to find mummy masks now by any means. It's going to come to the market. If somebody isn't very scrupulous about what they're doing, they're going to be looted. People are going to they're going to use some kind of a method. You know what method they were using to actually remove some of these fragments? They were using Palmolive soap. Yeah, so you read it too, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
I'm thinking like, this is the technique. These so-called experts are taking apart mummy masks, looking for first century documents because they probably found a sponsor. I'm going to say possibly, I'm going to cover myself here, but I can see this happening. You get the mummy masks now are going to be sold to a dealer. The dealer is going to inflate the price because there's a desire for it now. It's going to be sold to somebody that's wealthy, a benefactor. Who are these benefactors? Well, whoever. Somebody gull enough to believe this junk, they're going to pay a big price. So the person that bought the person that acquired the mask is going to make some money. The person that bought it from them to say that, hey, we're looking for a piece of a fragment of the gospel of Mark or another fragment from a gospel, they're going to make money from it, right?
Right. Yep.
And all in the hopes. And then they're going to destroy it somehow because all of it right now is shady from the get-go.
Yeah.
Now, so I'm saying where's the receipts for this? If you're going to destroy it, you should have documentations of where you got it from. You should have documentations of your technique of what you're using to remove it, the people that are involved. All right, who owns it? Okay, if these are the people that own it, why did they own it? For what purpose did they own it? What are their credentials?
Well,
who purchased it? Huh?
We can answer now some of those questions because after a number of years, more information came to light. And I don't know if you want.
I'm not done yet because sometimes if it doesn't go to peer review, where does it go first? Sometimes the most questionable things, they don't wait for peer review. What they do is do they take it to the academy? No, they take it to the laity. And why? Why does it go to the laity first? You avoid because it's probably about creating the hype. Hype brings in people,
but
and
you
then
got
you got lectures.
Back it up even further. Where did the papyrus come from in the first place? And we know that actually showed up. The fellow that was in charge of the curator at the University of Oxford, who had a piece of papyrus, a number of pieces in his office between newspapers, was trying to sell it to make money. And so this Gospel of Mark was actually from the Sackler Library at Oxford. And this guy was trying to sell it on the black market. He lost his job because of it. I've got his name somewhere, and I'll put some information up there. But that's where this actually story originated. So this stuff they try and sell it on the black market to a dealer, or as you said, very rich individuals, lucrative, to try and sell this stuff. And then it gets out circulated and the museums buy them, and sometimes they're fake, sometimes they're not. This actually happened to be a legitimate piece. but most of them were discovered down in Oxford in Egypt, and this is the case with this Mark fragment. I've got a photograph I can put up here, but we need to understand that there are people that are trying to sell this stuff to make money. And so we need to be careful, and you can't believe everything that you hear on the internet or these claims. What was surprising, of course, is that someone of the character and high respectability of Craig Evans came out with this claim originally, saying that he had found it in a mummy mask. So, but what we know now,
Okay, so it
nope.
didn't come from a mummy mask, but meanwhile, people are selling mummy masks in hopes that they can find it, and it didn't even come from there to begin with. So as
That's right.
and you know what? The whole thing is, if somebody just turned around and thought, would you find a first century written Gospel of Mark from the first century, from the end of the first century, in a mummy mask of the first century? That in itself does not make sense.
No, but it's possible. It's not out of the, reasonable to find a piece of papyrus in the first century. Some have argued that it was too early for the Gospels.
Yeah, of course,
Because
yes.
the
Yeah.
cartonnage was too early. But I did find evidence that, cartonnage did continue on for, into
And
the
you could
late first century. Yeah.
literature, because it'd be like old papyrus being used.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
you could.
they did find some other
Oh, sure.
literature that
But
was
the
used.
reason why the hype is, are you finding gospel? Are you
Yeah, that was
finding
the
literature?
importance.
I can
George?
just see what's going to happen is that they're going to go run to the churches before there's any peer review. They're going to create a lot of hype. People are going to say, "Oh, praise the Lord, hallelujah!" And meanwhile, people are looting masks and destroying them with palm-olive soap, hoping that they can find this gospel. And you know what it relies on? This kind of activity relies on I'm going to use the word crudility. That means you want it to be true so bad without even going and using any common sense, you believe it.
Yeah. Well, it still is
I should say you
possible.
believe it, but
Well, I'm not saying, we know that this is not a piece of papyrus, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that we could find a piece of papyrus. Um, I mean, they ended up finding, the Old Testament down at Mount Sinai,
oh, you're talking about the Sinaitic, or what is it called, from St. Catherine's
Sinaiticus, that
Monastery?
was
Yeah,
found in a garbage can. They were using to light fires, they claim. So it's not under the realm of possibility that something got damaged, out of use, was rolled up and used. What was important for them is that it was very, very early date, that it would put the Gospel of Mark, because right now we got P52, which is dated to the second or third century,
right,
Gospel of John. And Mark was actually, all scholars agree, conservative or liberal, that Mark was one of the first
exactly.
Gospels
Yes.
written, because Luke and John actually based some of their writings on Mark. So the important part for them was it was early dating, but that now has also been shown to be not true. The papyrus has been published. We know where it came from. It came from Egypt, not from a mummy mask.
Not from a
We know
mummy.
the dates to the second or third century. The question is, and that's what you're kind of exploring, why would someone do that? And what kind of ramifications is that causing in the antiquities market, with people going out there trying to buy mummy masks and doing this?
Well, no, for time's sake, we couldn't show other videos, but there are videos on YouTube that have individuals soaking a mummy mask in palm-olive soap with a group of individuals watching. I believe this individual was once the curator for the Green Museum. I thought,
Right.
like, you gotta be kidding me. Now, that raises a red flag, because remember, we check background checks. Now, if anybody's been watching anything in the news about what's going on with antiquities and looting, what is it called? The World of the Bible Museum in Washington. How many pieces have they had to return because they were found to be looted? 17,000? Matter of fact, I
Or
got the
some of them actually fakes.
Oh, the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's another one. They probably paid tens of millions of dollars for the Dead Sea Scrolls.
But they're
And
not fakes.
but there's another scholar, this name was like Kent Kipday. He's went back and they hired him, and he's made a claim that they are fake. But they're talking about the ones that were bought by the Green family.
Oh, there's been copies of them, certainly, yes, okay.
So
But not the
he went
originals.
back, and they hired him to go look at the documents. And that was,
Yeah,
and this is also documents on
well,
YouTube.
just so our audience, just to be clear, George, just so our audience is not confused, The ones that are in the safes in Israel, the Book of the Scroll.
Oh yeah, we're not talking about that at all. We're talking about looted
No,
material.
but that's why we need to make that clear, because there's maybe people out there saying or claiming that the Dead Sea Scrolls are not real. Well, no, we're not. I'm claiming they are real, but there are fakes that have been copied and reproduced out there, and I've got a
purchased.
photograph of one.
You know,
So
even as a antiquity, I collect for museums. I don't sell to individuals. I have been approached. Oh, can you find this? Can you find that? So
last year they found a number of pieces of the minor prophets in one of the caves there near En-Gedi, and they were doing some extra excavations below the cave where I was working, cave 12, and they did find some in situ.
yeah, you just used the word in situ. Yeah, so you're talking about
In
license,
location.
permitted,
That's
everything
right.
is, yeah, that's what so we're not talking about buying something from the antiquity market. And what would drive this is where I'm going from, this type of hype that ends up not to be true at all, actually causes looting, because now there's going to be a demand for mummy masks so that it can tear them apart and look for hidden documents or documents in there. And hopefully if they lug out, they can find maybe a gospel, an old gospel, a fragment of a gospel.
And carbon 14 is not helpful because you can take a piece of old papyrus that's blank and you can write on it, even though the carbon that they use in the ink could be carbon dated. That would put it an early date, but you can still have an old piece of papyrus that they can use to write something on and then try and sell it to a museum or a dealer somewhere. And there's lots of people out there that can do that kind of thing. So there are fakes, there are forgeries, so you do have to be careful. I mean, I've had people approach me when I've been overseas wanting me to buy coins or artifacts
Oh, yes.
that I know they're fake.
Well, you bring up a point where it wasn't a tour group. I was with Dr. Ann Davis, and we had a guide, and we went into, I was going to say West Bank. We were by Ramallah, and we were looking at an archaeological dig. It was a tell, so it had to be Iron Age 1 or 2 or somewhere around that line.
Right.
And so it tells that we went up the hill to look at the ruins of an excavation. When they came back down, all right, there was some gentleman that pulled up in a car, and he opened up the trunk, and here the trunk was full of late Bronze Age artifacts. And I'll just use the words like, if I said a bills, and these things would go for thousands of dollars on the antiquity market. Yeah. You open it up. Would you like to buy? I could imagine if I, like, oh yeah, I'll take one of these and 2 of those and 5. And then I put them in my car. Not that I did, but if I was dumb enough to do something like that, I drive 2 miles down the road, and here their cousin, that is the cop, pulls me over, and then I'm in the pokey for 4 years, because you read that article where they actually confiscated some ossuaries that people were stealing and tried to take out of the country. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you can't do the time, don't do the crime.
Now I want to show a couple of photographs. I'm going to share my screen, George.
Okay.
Okay. Well, why it matters. Well, this is a photograph of what is understood to be the oldest piece of the gospel, papyrus of the gospel, P52, and known as the Ryland Papyrus, P52. It dates to 120 to 125 AD. The mark fragment, as I said, had been dated, according to the scholars, to about in the 80s AD. But again, not confirmed, no evidence of that, just a claim. So there's a lot of skepticism. Here's Joe Rogan actually holding a copy of it. I thought that was kind of an interesting photograph. Someone had given him a copy of it during one of his interviews. That's the size of it. Here it is all blown up, P52. So that's the earliest one we have, earliest known manuscript of the New Testament. And the controversy continues with Craig, of course, claiming it was Mark. Now, the controversy really ends with the publication in 2018 of the Oxyrhynchus Papyri, volume 83, where they have the fragment of Mark that was talked about, claiming that it had come from a mummy mask. It's P137, papyrus number 137, or P. Oxyrhynchus 5345, formerly known as the first century marker FCM that we were talking about, of Mark 1, verses 7 to 9 and verses 16 to 18. And it's actually published now, so we don't have to wait for the publication of it anymore. And it was discovered by Grenfield and Hunt in Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, back in the in 1903. So again, not in a mummy mask, but found in situ, in location, at the site called Oxyrhanicus, and it's right there. And we've of the Gospels of Matthew and John, as well as fragments of other New Testament books. And they've been slowly being published year by year. And this is Oxyrhanicus Papyrus volume number 83. So there's 83, 82 previous volumes. And so this one had come out in 2018 after this had been announced. And so the editor to this volume is the one that had this papyrus, and he was trying to sell it at Oxford.
So did he steal it?
No, well, he was the curator, so he had it in his office where he was doing his work at the library, at Sackler Library in Oxford, and he was trying to get a buyer for it, and he tried to put it on the market. So sometimes they sell these things. So he was trying to make some money on the side, I guess. He's actually one of the editors to this volume that had been published. So that's where this story had originated, and it got out there through the channels and to Craig Evans's hands, and a lot of speculation as to what happened, and why he told the story. But he is basically come out and just said that he had the wrong information, was fed the wrong information.
Okay.
As a
Well,
result
let me
of
ask you something, David, before this is fresh in my mind. And the listening audience, of course, just saw this fragment too. And that was written on both sides. So this is coming from a biblos. This is coming from a book. Now, in the first century Egypt, did they have books in first century Egypt? Or did they
Well,
have
again,
books?
this is not dated to the first century. This is dated to
No.
the second or third century as well.
Well, see, this is what I'm talking about, is just that they were saying it was from the first. Okay, if somebody said the fragment came from the first century,
Right.
right? If they said that, and the scholars saw that, and it was written on both sides, how could it be first century if at that time they didn't have books yet? They only had scrolls. This is my question.
Well, the codexes do date back earlier than that, so
I didn't
not
know that.
everything was in scrolls. I did
Well,
have
when did the codex
codexes.
start? I'm just hitting this off. I don't expect you to know. We can look that up. When's the first evidence of a codex of books, of a book?
Well, let me just
We don't have to do it right now.
well, no, let's do what we can do. We can go to Grok and we can certainly ask Grok.
Because that would be, if I saw that and somebody said, oh, it's first century, and then I said, well, they didn't have codexes in the first century, only the second century, then that would put the end of that would say, well, that's the end of that. So I'm just questioning it, that's all.
Yeah, well, Grok returns that it was around the first century AD, with significant examples from the Roman Empire. Codex Sinaiticus, one of the earliest complete Christian Bibles, dates to 330 to 360 AD.
But the
early
earliest
first
codexes
century.
are first century.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it could be.
It could be, but it'd be on the very cusp of it starting then, right? As far as they know.
Well, again, that's one of the things that was the impetus for it.
Yeah.
Was the proliferation of New Testaments being and Old Testaments being circulated around churches. They need
But
more
then again,
copies of
something
it.
like that would be extremely valuable to those that were having them made, because now you got a book on both sides, not just a scroll. I shouldn't say not just a scroll, but to me, it just puts a whole lot of more scrutiny into, a thought, like, okay, if it's written on both sides, then we're not talking about a scroll, we're talking about a book. If we're talking about a book, when were they first being used? Now, if it would be the second century, but it's not, you said first century, but if it was the second century, then we can say it couldn't possibly come from a first century mummy mask because they didn't have books yet. They had scrolls. That's where I was getting at, right?
Right, but when we've just removed that argument.
I know it, but it was worth a
What they
thought.
did find is 100,000 papyrus fragments in Oxyrhanicus in Egypt. So they've got a lot of these, comprising about 3,875 individual documents. Now, those aren't all the scriptures; those are other ancient writings. But they've got a lot that they can pieces of the puzzle they can put together.
How many fragments was that?
100,000.
Well, I was told that they used AI and scanning techniques.
Speaking of AI, we did do a podcast on the Herculaneum papyrus, and they are doing scanning now to unroll some of these damaged and crinkled ones, and they are using AI to piece some of these pieces and parts together to be able to figure out the manuscripts that they were writing. So AI is helping, speeding up the process, because you can imagine sitting down at a jigsaw puzzle and trying to piece all these little pieces and parts together. But AI does help. It can put pieces together and does help. These were discovered between 1897 and 1907. So during that time period in the desert, they found all these pieces of writings. As I said, they've been year by year since 1898. There have been 71 volumes have been published, with the estimated 40 more volumes to follow, one per year. This fragment of mark that had been hot in the press and no one knew, and was dated very early and connected with a mummy mask. We now know it's not. It's connected. It is a real papyrus. It is the real Gospel of Mark. Was dated in the book that was published to be the 2nd to 3rd century, with many of the others. And if you want more information on this, if you go to the Evangelical Textual Criticism page, this has a lot of the documentation, the emails that went back and forth for this whole controversy, and following it along with the FCM. They call it the 1st century mark. It's now been shown to be 2nd to 3rd century mark, but it was called the FCM for a long time, and until it was published in 2018, and we finally discovered where it was published from. So again, a little bit of misinformation that gets put out there, and somebody claims something on Facebook or Google or whatever, and then lo and behold, it becomes fact. And you know how the rumors start. We don't need to be going around destroying mummy masks, because now we've got the technology where we can scan them and we can read what's on them without having to take them all apart.
Well, David, I had my rant, and I feel pretty good now, actually.
Oh, got it out of your system, did you?
Well,
Good.
I got my blood circulating, so I think I can go to the gym now and have a pretty decent workout. But David, let's end this in a very positive way, because you're right. We don't have to destroy mummy masks, because really cool things can happen when we try to preserve and we try to conserve artifacts here at the museum, and basically almost every museum.
Sure.
It's called we luck out. We're preserving something, and something happens, we really luck out. So I'm just going to give you for instance,
Yeah.
like a piece comes in, and it's pretty common. Like, for instance, a faience
cup.
cup. Yeah, and the thing is, faience cups are not that rare. They're not. But when they come in, they're encrusted, and we want to be careful, because sometimes when it's encrusted, that could be what's holding the cup together.
Right.
So we slowly remove it, and hopefully the thing's intact. But David, every once in a while, when we slowly remove it, and sometimes it takes a long time, we got to soak it in a solution, not palm oil in, but we soak it in a solution and slowly remove some of that dirt, and we turn around, and voila, on this, we have hieroglyphs, very beautiful hieroglyphs on a faience cup that we find through conservation and cleaning. This dates to the 19th dynasty. Isn't that cool? Yeah.
Now I want to mention that sometimes we do use household items to do restoration. I'll give you 2 examples.
Not a hammer.
No, well, no, not a hammer. One of them is Agatha Christie.
Well, wait a minute. Yeah.
When she was finding the famous ivories, pendants at Ur in Mesopotamia, when she was working with Sir Leonard Woolley, she used her cosmetic cream for her face to actually clean them, and use that to clean them, because it cleaned them up really, really nice.
She's used that to clean ivory?
She used it to clean all the famous ivories that
God.
had. So that's what she used. Now, the other thing is that when we do our restoration of our pottery, we use LePage's glue, water-based. So it's not some fancy kind of glue that we use. It's just ordinary, but just the normal white LePage's glue you use for your paper mache. It holds together, and if you make a mistake gluing a piece of pottery together, you can soak it in water, and It comes apart easily, and then you can reglue it back together again. So we do use some simple household items sometimes
Mhm.
for restoration. So just because we're using pole model doesn't have to be fancy to be good. It just has to work.
Okay, something else clean, talking about just dirt and grime, and then we have things that can really damage really nice artifacts. It's called bronze disease.
Right.
So you can find bronze in an environment like a tomb, and after many centuries, that bronze metal actually absorbs some of the minerals that's in the soil. But when it's, you can say, oh, the tomb is open up and now it is into the environment where we got humidity and different types of elements going on, it could cause bronze disease. And this is a large Egyptian situla. It dates to the late Pharaonic period, early Hellenistic. So let's say sixth century to third century BC. So at least it's 2,300 years old, 2,300. It's very large, very beautiful, and you can see all the different, you can say, funeral scenes on it. But it had bronze disease, so I soaked it for like 6 months in a solution. Now you can see inside that green patina. I
Right.
didn't move the green patina on the inside, which so we could see what it originally looked like. It was pretty thick, but we want to try to preserve the outside because bronze disease doesn't care what type of metal it is or how much it's worth. It'll go right through it, and it can happen fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So when I was cleaning this, like I said, it was soaking for 6 months, and then we take it out and we slowly try to remove some of the patina to make sure there's no bronze disease underneath it. I thought I scratched the rim, and I'll have to give you some close-up pictures. This is the rim right here.
Right.
Now, underneath what we see right here, these are called registers. So we got a high register and a lower register of different scenes. But above that, on this rim right here, are actually hieroglyphs. Now, at first I thought I scratched it because, of course, I'm removing things and I got a little lens so I can look up. And I thought, oh, darn, but I still got to keep on cleaning it because it could still have bronze disease. So while I'm cleaning it, here we found a whole selection of hieroglyphs. Now, it hasn't been translated yet. So some lucky Egyptologist is going to get to translate this for the first time to tell us what exactly this says. But isn't that
Right.
cool? This is another indication where you try to preserve something or clean an artifact, and
Right.
as a result, you're not destroying it, you're preserving it, and something cool actually happens.
And another area of bronze disease is actually coins.
Oh, absolutely. It'll go through a coin really quick.
Right.
You know something else? One coin can affect another coin and trigger bronze disease in other items. So that's why, as a curator, you got to look over your items, even if they are in storage. Usually they shouldn't be stored like over top one another. They should be still within view. So you got drawers that you open up and you can observe these items to make sure that they don't have bronze disease. Because if you have bronze disease, like a bronze coin, and it's touching another coin that's bronze, or they're stacked up together, it could trigger the whole thing. And believe me, I've seen it. You know what it looks like? It looks like a geopet.
Yeah.
That's how bad it can get. And
I
go ahead.
in a past life, I actually did fire restoration, and I was an expert in the area of what we call corrosion control. And
All right.
whenever a fire happens, all of the chemicals that burn in a fire create something that's very, very corrosive, and it gets into the atmosphere and mixed with water. And whenever it gets onto a metal object, it begins corroding it like cancer. And I would have to go in and neutralize it. And you do that by removing one of the elements, water, air, um, or the chemical. Usually it's something caustic.
Right.
And it would take apart a circuit board. It'll eat through that like crazy. So you have to get to it right away. So it's similar that you're talking about with the bronze disease. So we call it a cancer, and it just keeps eating away and eating away at the metal until it breaks down and no longer works anymore. But we were able to reverse. You can't reverse it, but you can stop it.
You can stop it. Yeah. Another thing is I was over at a gentleman's house and he was showing me artifacts. And this has been like over 20 years ago. And he goes, oh, I got to show you this one artifact, George. And he goes, I got it in this drawer. And I haven't seen it for a long time. And he goes, I think you might be interested. So we go into a side office and he opens up this drawer. And here's this puddle of, it kind of looks like pool chalk because that's what bronze disease looks like. If you go play pool and you're chalking your stick, and you go like this and you get that powder all everywhere. That's how it ends up. It looks like that bluish green color. And here in that drawer was a stack about this high of bluish green. That was the end of his artifact. That was it. He goes, I don't know what happened to it. I go, I know what happened to it.
Bronze
Yeah,
disease.
that's it. That's a pile like that. Well, I'm going to finish this.
Lots
I
of
got one more thing that I
okay.
think like. Okay, now years ago, I got invited over to Israel, and they found. Now it wasn't rare for Israel. This isn't rare for Israel, but for a museum on this side of the ocean, it would be nice to acquire. It was actually, like the bronze duck's bill axe from like the 19th to 17th century in Egypt, right? So it was a selection of bronze weaponry, and so I went over to take a look at it, and then I found a museum that would purchase it. Of course, all the paperwork is intact, and it had weapons such as, and also the bronze duckbill axe, and also this right here. Not these particular ones, but similar ones like this one. And this is a Hyksos dagger. Hyksos, so this would be 15th dynasty, 17th century Egypt. So really cool items for a museum to have on display. Israel Museum has quite a selection, so they didn't need it. So anyway, I went over there and acquired these. So to make a long story short, this was about the time of 9/11, the tragedy that befell the Twin Towers. I had like 2 or 3 crates, nice sized crates, coming to Albuquerque, New Mexico. At that time, I was curator of a museum in Trinity Southwest University. I have a gentleman I think Dr. Stephen Collins, right?
Right.
So I got a phone call from Customs, and they said, we want you to come down here right away. I said, well, okay. And we want you to open up these crates, and we want to know exactly what you have coming over here. And I said, all right. So I had one of these cards in my wallet, and I went in there, and here's these custom inspectors along with officers, and they got their sidearms, and I look at the crate, and here, all the crates on the very top have a manifest. It tells you what's in the crate. Now, whoever did this wasn't thinking too hard. And of course, it said in the crates, weapons. And I said, gentlemen, I passed out my card to everybody, and I said, I'm a curator of a museum, and these are bronze weapons from Israel, and they're going to go on display in a museum, and they're probably at least around 2,000 years old. Well, we still need you to open the crate. And I said, indeed, I will. I understand. And, I was respectful. And I said that. And I had the white gloves with me because I knew, the white gloves you put on when you handle artifacts. I had a bunch of those because I knew once I showed or opened the crate, they would want to handle them. And it defused the situation. So I thought, if I do this and it becomes a show and tell, I'll get these things out of custom like this because they're all going to have a good time. And that's exactly what happened. We unscrewed it, and I unwrapped the artifacts and laid them on the table, and I explained what they were, and I said, everybody put on some gloves, and we're going to pass these around. And they were so excited. Huh?
You diffused the situation, pun intended.
Oh, come on, don't do that. Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
There's a situation I think people would like to. That was unusual. That's fun. You come in, you think like, what in the world's custom want? And stuff like. And they were all so serious when I went in there. I'm 5'8". I'm 5'8". I'm a curator. And here's my card.
Here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Others might be thinking. If the bronze crusting on those artifacts is so damaging, after you clean them, do you still have to be as careful wearing gloves, or?
You should, because you're right. I should be using gloves right now. You know what I do? Talking about household using, I kind of said, well, Palmolive, and I put my nose up like, I don't know if it works or not. I think it's kind of odd. After I treat an item for bronze disease, so it doesn't have direct connection with the atmosphere, you know what I do? I melt wax and I smear it on top of it and I buff it in.
Yep.
So that's why it's so shiny. It says it's got a wax surface. Everything's got a wax surface on it.
Yep.
And every once in a while, I'll go back and I'll apply some more wax, very fine, and I'll buff it in.
Yep. Well, that's how they preserve the King Tut figurines. They used beeswax after they brought it out of the tomb. They
Mhm.
coated everything with beeswax, and then they shipped it back to the museum. They did it right outside the tomb. In fact, I've got a photograph of it. So yeah, beeswax is what's used to. And you're right. And when I did corrosion control of electronic equipment, we would spray it down with an oil, a special oil on top of it that didn't evaporate. You can't use WD-40 because it evaporates. So we had a special product. We had our own chemists with BMS Catastrophe that I worked with, and we would spray down the electronic surface, and it puts a barrier. So as long as you can keep the oxygen from coming in contact with the metal,
Mhm.
you can prevent the corrosion from happening. So you did the same thing, with the beeswax. So that's a good place to stop, I think.
Well, you're right. And the thing is David, being a curator and my mind is about conservation so that things last for a long, long time. I take that personal. So every time I wake up in the morning, I take some wax and I kind of like buff the top of my head. And I think that's a good way to stay preserved.
Good, good. Gotta
Good.
wax
Hmm.
her.
Hmm.
Well,
So hey, with that in mind,
you
okay,
waxed eloquent today, George.
I know. Try to stay charming.
Yeah, wax.
So I started with the tantrum and then we ended with something I think kind of entertaining and fun. All right. So I think that's cool. So hey, David, you know what? You never done yet. You never ended the program. Always end the program. You end the program.
Oh, well, I just think the lesson to take away from this is that, you have to be careful of misinformation. I think we need to still remain open to new processes with AI and things like that for preserving and discovering things. And I think that the audience out there, I watch sometimes Dan Bongino, our audience might remember or know of Dan Bongino, and he has a rule on his podcast. He's now in charge of the FBI, I think, in your country. He used to say the Dan Bongino rule was you always wait 48 hours before you make a statement about something. And so when anybody makes some of these outlandish claims, we should wait a little bit before we chime in on it. And sure enough, it took a couple of years, but in this particular case, we found that the Mark Gospel did indeed exist. It just didn't come from a mummy mask, and it didn't originate in the first century, but probably a much later date than that. Nonetheless important, and the Oxyrhynchus papyri are really important for textual criticism and manuscripts. I think we can end it there today.
A lot of fun today. Talked about some artifacts. And as David said, what is it? Pre-warned is pre-advised.
Pre-warned is pre-armed.
Yeah, something like that. So, all right. I'll see you, David.
All right, good talking to you, George.